Can you imagine loving a country that isn't your own so much that you'd ask to be buried there? Well, that's not some fictional story. Today, we're diving into the incredible life of an American man whose story is a critical and honestly an often forgotten chapter in Korean history.
So get this. This powerful quote comes from an 86-year-old American named Homer Hulbert. It's 1949, and after being exiled for 40 years, he's finally on his way back to Korea. When someone asks him about his final wishes, this is what he says. Not Westminster Abbey, the famous resting place of kings and poets, but Korea. So what on earth could inspire that kind of devotion?
And that's really the big question here, isn't it? Who was Homer Hulbert? What happened in his life that created this incredible, unbreakable bond with the nation of Korea? Well, let's find out together.
Okay, so our story doesn't start with a general or a diplomat. It starts with a young teacher. He travels halfway across the world for a new job, having no idea that this one decision was about to lead him to his life's true calling. So in 1886, Hulbert lands in Korea. His mission? Pretty straightforward. Teach English at a new royal school. But he doesn't just, stay in his lane. He immediately dives headfirst into the culture. And the timeline here is it's mind-blowing. By 1889, only 3 years later, he's fluent in Korean. And then by 1891, he writes a textbook that would literally change everything.
The book was called Samin Pilji, and that name says it all. It translates to knowledge all people must have. See, at the time, all the important books were written using complicated Chinese characters that only the super-educated elite could read. Hulbert decided, nope, not doing that. He wrote his book in Hangul, the Korean alphabet, so that anyone, from a government minister to a farmer, could learn about the wider world. It was revolutionary.
But Hulbert's impact went way beyond just one textbook. He truly fell in love with Korean culture, and he became one of its biggest cheerleaders, often at a time when the rest of the world, and even some Koreans, were kind of overlooking its unique brilliance.
Just take a look at this list. These are things we take for granted in written Korean today, but Hulbert was a total pioneer. He championed Hangul, calling it one of the most scientific alphabets in the world. He introduced periods and commas, and get this, he helped popularize putting spaces between words. Can you imagine reading a page of text that's just one giant, unbroken string of characters? That's what he helped fix.
And his passion wasn't just for language. He heard this beautiful, haunting folk song, Arirang. It's basically the soul of Korea in a melody. He realized it was just passed down through memory, with no written music. So he became the very first person to write it down using Western musical notes, saving it not just for Korea, but for the whole world to appreciate.
But things were about to get a lot more serious. As tensions with Japan began to rise, this American teacher would transform into a trusted friend of the emperor, a royal bodyguard, and a secret messenger on a mission to save a nation.
The big turning point came in 1895. It was a terrifying time. Japanese agents had just brutally murdered Queen Min, and the whole palace was gripped by fear. Emperor Gojong was convinced he was next. And in that moment of absolute crisis, who steps up? Homer Hulbert. He and a few other Westerners literally stood guard outside the emperor's room, night after night. They were human shields. The thinking was, the assassins might risk killing a Korean royal, but they wouldn't dare kill an American and start an international war. That single act of bravery earned him the emperor's complete and total trust.
And that trust led to two incredibly risky, high-stakes missions. First, in 1905, the emperor gave him a secret letter to hand-deliver to President Roosevelt, basically begging America to help protect Korea's independence. Then, 2 years later, he was sent on an even wilder mission to a peace conference in The Hague. His job? To be a decoy, a distraction, to draw the attention of Japanese spies so the real Korean delegates could sneak in and plead their case.
So why did these missions fail? This is the heartbreaking part. It was because of a secret betrayal. See, the U.S. had an official treaty, a written promise from 1882, to help Korea if it was treated unfairly. But what Hulbert and the emperor didn't know was that America had already cut a secret deal. It was called the Taft-Katsura Agreement. The U.S. basically told Japan, you can have Korea, in exchange for Japan promising not to mess with U.S. interests in the Philippines. The promise was already broken before Hulbert's ship even left the port. But even with that devastating betrayal, Hulbert's story was far from over. His promise to Korea, his commitment, would last for decades, and it all leads to a final, bittersweet return home.
So for all his efforts, what was his reward? Well, the Japanese, who now controlled Korea, were furious that he tried to expose them on the world stage. In 1907, they kicked him out. They expelled Homer Hulbert from the country he now considered his home. It would be 4 long, painful decades before he could return.
40 years. Just think about that number for a second. That's a lifetime for many people. For 40 years, from thousands of miles away in the United States, Homer Hulbert never, ever gave up on Korea. He wrote articles, he gave speeches, he did anything he could to be a voice for a nation that had been silenced, keeping the dream of an independent Korea alive. And then, after World War II, the impossible happened. Korea was finally liberated. In 1949, the brand new South Korean government sent an official invitation to the man who had fought for them for so long. They asked Homer Hulbert to please come home, not as a teacher, but as a guest of the state, as a national hero.
He was 86 years old, but he made that long journey back across the ocean. He arrived in Korea frail and sick, but he had made it back to the land he had dedicated his life to. And just 1 week later, he passed away. He was home, and his final wish was granted.
The story of Homer Hulbert really leaves you with a big question, doesn't it? What does it truly mean to be a friend to a nation? He wasn't Korean by blood, but his actions showed a loyalty deeper than any passport. He fought for Korea's culture when it was being ignored, and for its freedom when it was betrayed. His life really makes you think, what does it mean to have a belief so strong that you would make another country's destiny your own?